recess. When we last left, ladies and gentlemen, we were with Senator Moylan. And Senator Moylan, I'm going to ask if you wanted to yield to Senator Marsh Titano, or did you want to call for the previous question and vote on the motion?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I agree to yield to Senator Marsh Titano's question there. Please.
Please proceed.
The question, I believe, could be answered that her concerns will be answered in the rules and regulations as they are made by as stated in the bill. Okay. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Senator Marsh, does that answer your concern?
Hungin, that we will be able to address it later in the rules and regs.
On that, thank you. On the motion, on the amendment, are there any other questions? If not, there was an objection. All those in favor of keeping the amendment to add at the bottom of the sentence, a special cannabis assessment fee in the amount of 10% shall be imposed on the dollar value of cannabis that is sold at a retail cannabis store. This fee shall be on top of any other taxes imposed on the retailer. On that motion, there was an objection. All those in favor to keeping the to have the amendment in, signify by raising your hand. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Motion fails. Senator Jim Moylan, I understand you have one more amendment. And is it in writing?
Yes, Madam Speaker, in writing.
Was it passed out?
I believe so. Yes, I understand.
Can you go ahead and read the amendment, please?
Yes, Madam Speaker. It's a reference to line 18 of page 18 to add a section E of subsection 8113. So it's a whole new item.
Please read the amendment.
Yes, Madam Speaker. There is hereby established a fund to be known as the Cannabis Regulation Fund, which shall be maintained separate and apart from any other fund of the Government of Guam, and shall be administered by the Department of Administration. All funds collected or received in accordance to the Guam Excise Tax imposed on the sale or transfer of cannabis from a cannabis cultivation facility to a retail cannabis store or a cannabis manufacturing facility shall be deposited in the Cannabis Regulation Fund and shall be annually allocated and is hereby appropriated and shall be continued to be deemed appropriated as follows. 40% shall be appropriated to the Department of Revenue and Taxation. 20% shall be appropriated to the Department of Public Health and Social Service. 20% shall be appropriated to the Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Center, and 20% shall be transferred to the general fund. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Senator Moylan, I'm going to have to go back onto the previous amendment and get Renee. Senators, I want to apologize. When we left off yesterday, this morning you received an amendment with all the amendments that were put intact as of yesterday. And that should be before you. Before we entertain the amendment, as noted by Senator Moylan, we have to dispose on the amendment that was amended, and that copy was cleaned, a clarified copy was provided for you this morning on your desk. So does everybody have this version with all of the amendments from yesterday's hearing on D? D. You have an amendment to this amendment? Okay. Senator Torres, are you a point of information or a point of inquiry? When we left off last night before the motion for reconsideration this morning by Senator Lee, this motion was on the session floor.
Understood, Madam Chair. I guess what I'm trying to get from you is, are you then saying that we're not going to entertain the amendment which is going to add a new section E, and instead you're going to go back to this
No,
one?
that's why I apologize to the body. I was
Okay.
reminded by the clerk that this motion needed to be, this amendment needed to be disposed of
Yes, I
before
agree.
we can entertain Senator Moylan's new amendment.
Yes, ma'am, and I will,
Yeah.
I would like to speak on that, but if it's indeed proposed.
So,
So,
just withdraw the
Yes,
amendment as proffered until we
thank you,
dispose
Madam
of this
Speaker. I
previous.
wish to withdraw the amendment of line 18, page 18, reference to item D, letter D.
Just so that we can go back to the previous amendment.
So we can kind of go back to the previous amendment, please.
And then we'll, on
Okay.
that motion, no objection, motion carries. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Senator Torres, I have Senator Torres and Senator Shelton on the amendment as clarified. Everybody has that copy. Senator Torres, you're recognized.
Madam Speaker, if I understand correctly, we are entertaining an amendment to line 18, page 18, to add a new subsection D to section 8113 of the bill. I believe, Madam Speaker, that this amendment is inappropriate, and it's actually null and voided because of the previous action that we took when the previous amendment to amend a portion of subsection A was stricken down and failed. That amendment, in essence, created a new cannabis assessment fee upon the retail sales. When we struck that down, there is no longer a new cannabis assessment fee. This amendment to add section D uses the funds from that special cannabis assessment fee collected or received from a retail cannabis store, and it apportions the distribution. So I think that when we got rid of that, when we defeated the first amendment to subsection A, in essence, we defeated the creation of a cannabis assessment fee. So
Yes.
how can we then appropriate from a cannabis assessment fee?
You are right, Senator
So
Torres.
I believe that the issue
It
is
becomes
void.
moot. Thank you.
Thank you.
We will take a moment's recess.
the order. It's just
Let's go. This legislature is back from recess. Senator Jim, on your amendment, please. Please read your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So the most recent, after lengthy conversations with my fellow senators, is one that was just passed out. Again, it's referring to add a new subsection of letter D to line 18 of page 18. And if you're to clarify which form we're actually looking at, on item 6, it says 10%. That's the most recent one. So item 6 says 10%. So hopefully, it was all passed out, but just in case there's any confusion of which form to look at.
And it's to add line 18, page 18,
Yes, Madam Speaker.
to add a new subsection D to section 8113 of the bill. Am I correct?
Yes, Madam Speaker.
Please proceed.
Okay, item D is, as read through it, there is hereby established a fund to be known as Cannabis Fund, which shall be maintained separate and apart from any other fund of the government of Guam, and shall be administered by the Department of Administration. 25% of the excess tax collected or received pursuant to subsection 8113A shall be deposited in the Cannabis Fund and shall be annually allocated, and is hereby appropriated and shall be continued to be deemed appropriated as follows. Item 1, 15% of the fund to the Guam Police Department for the purpose of recruiting and maintaining police officers and purchasing equipment and detection devices. Item 2, 15% of the fund to the Guam Customs and Quarantine Agency for the purpose of recruiting and maintaining customs and quarantine officers and purchasing equipment and detection devices. Item 3, 20% of the fund to the Department of Revenue and Taxation for operations consistent with the implementation of this act. Item 4, should be item 4, 40% of the fund to the Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Center, Substance Abuse Treatment, Prevention, and Education. And item 5, the last item should be item 5, 10% of the fund to the Department of Agriculture's Conservation Officers and Law Enforcement Section. And thank you for our legal for helping us put this all together last minute. And that's the amendment to be made, Madam Speaker.
On the amendment, anyone wishing to speak? Senator Pito Talai, you are recognized on this amendment.
Madam Speaker, I support that amendment. However, I want to make an amendment to the amendment, especially on the number 6, where it says 10% of the fund to the Department of Agriculture's Conservation Officer, Law Enforcement. I want to rephrase that back to the original statement that I make regarding to place recruitment, because they're going to come back to us and ask us what can they do with that money. And I know 10% is not that much, but at least we can just mention that, for recruitment purposes and for resources on equipment and what they need. The same as the first one.
On that amendment to the amendment, and that is on item 5 as noted by the author. No objection. Motion carries. Anyone else on the amendment? Senator Therese Talai, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment, to me, is a huge departure from the one that was originally on the floor that was discussed yesterday, the one that was put on the floor right before it was withdrawn this morning. And the biggest part of the changes is that the Department of Public Health is nowhere in here. And I guess I'm getting confused again as to the intention of this bill. The bill, the advocates in favor of legalization of marijuana, not just on Guam, but all over the nation, they say that when we legalize marijuana, this is to save the resources of our law enforcement agencies, our courts, our prosecutors, and that they will no longer need to be arresting people for marijuana violations. And part of the bill removes those code sections that establish that possession or sale of marijuana is a violation of law. So when we remove those from the law and we legalize marijuana, GPD, Customs, Department of Agriculture conservation officers, there's supposed to be less of an impact on them from legalization of marijuana. They have some duties, of course, and they have to be part of this process as to developing the rules and regulations, but the huge burden is supposedly not on them. The huge burden comes on the only reason why some of these states were successful in their implementation of or their legalization of marijuana is because they upfront put huge resources into public health, behavioral health, to make sure that what the promises that were made, and especially revenue and taxation, and I just find it a little bit disturbing that revenue and taxations is only 20%. And this is 20% of 25% of the revenue that's supposed to be generated from this bill. So it's just looking a little backwards to me that, first of all, according to the fiscal note, this bill will only generate $5 million in revenue for the government of Guam. I think to stand up the program, we might have to use all of that $5 million. And I definitely think 25% of the $5 million, I thought I calculated that, but is 1.2 million to be divided between these very critical agencies. Thank you, Senator. Thank you to our appropriations chair for calculating that. But in other words, the allocations seem off to me, that we're not prioritizing the agencies who are really going to be bearing the brunt of standing up an industry. Not necessarily the enforcement, but standing up the industry, preparing these places, preparing the rules, doing the inspections, and most of the enforcement, I think, is going to be taken care of by Department of Revenue and Taxation, who has to inspect all of their licensees, and the Department of Public Health, who is supposed to also be protecting us and our children from negative impacts. And so they're supposed to be also doing inspections, just like and most of the states, they do this through their environmental health divisions in the Departments of Public Health. So I'm not sure whether to amend this, to decrease. I think if we're still allowing 75% of the excise tax to go to the general fund, of course we could do that during appropriations time, but I think it's going to be lost, that money is needed to implement this program, these agencies that we're pretty much by this bill sending it over to the Department of Revenue and Taxation and the Department of Agriculture to stand up an entire industry on Guam. In many other places, this is done by a very, a dedicated task force led by governors, and where all of these agencies involved are participating and making sure that they can do this. But I guess I'm not sure whether it's proper. If we wanted to take 25%, which would be another $1 million or more, and put that towards the Department of Public Health, I guess I would add that as an amendment to this amendment. So to add, that's not in writing, Madam Speaker, because this is the first time I'm seeing this version of this amendment. But it would be just to add 25% of the excise tax, just as it is up there, to be appropriated to the Department of Public Health and Social Services. Thank you.
Senator Terlahi said that if the amendments needed to be in writing, and I'm
You can put it in writing, Madam Speaker.
So I'm going to go ahead and set
Could
that
assist me?
aside so you can write it. Anyone else wishing to speak to the amendment? I will give Senator Talai a few minutes. Anyone else to speak on the amendment? Senator San Augustine, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise in support of the amendment. I understand that everybody's concerned about how much money we should give public health. We need to remind ourselves that the rules and regulations that's going to be written up by the Cannabis Board still has to come back to us. If it's determined that there's a lot more money out there, that's where we all should sit down and get ready to say, we need to move more than 25% of the 15. When it comes to that point, that's when we start doing that. Right now, we're already writing a check without any money in the account. I'm just trying to understand. I mean, I can say the author of the amendment says 5 million. That's what's projected on the fiscal note. We don't know if it ends up being 10 million or it becomes 2 million. I would just say we should hold hands and get ready if the bill passes, when the rules and regulations are written up by the board, then we start saying, this is how much you're going to make, this is what's in the market, and then we start saying, let's move more money into public health. Because yes, exactly what the previous speaker said, we need to concentrate on protecting the community. But I don't want to write a blank check when there's no money in the account yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. Anyone else on the amendment? Senator Will Castro, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just a point of information, if the previous speaker can illustrate where in either version of the bill the rules and regulations are required to come back to the body for adoption.
I'm going to, Senator Castro, I'm going to ask you to confer with the author of the bill. I'm going to ask to entertain the amendment on hand. If that's yielding, Senator Clint, there was a question. Are you asking the author of the main legislation?
Any of my colleagues, Madam Speaker.
Would you like to answer that question?
Sure. I'll yield to the question, Madam Speaker. So the measure requires that the Guam Cannabis Control Board promulgate rules and regulations. So it can be inferred that any board that promulgates rules and regulations is subject to the AAA process, the Administrative Adjudication Act, and that process requires that it goes back to the legislature for approval. Well, essentially it gets submitted to the legislature, then the legislature has 90 days to act on the proposed rules and regulations.
Thank you very much. Does that answer your question, Senator Castro?
No, it doesn't, but let me ask a more direct question. Is the legislature required to approve the rules and regulations? And we'll reduce it to a yes or no answer, Madam Speaker.
Yes.
Not required to approve, correct, but have the ability to act on it within 90 days.
And the timeline trigger will be there. Does that answer your question?
I'm going to interpret that as a no. Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker.
On the amendment, anyone else wishing to speak on the amendment? Senator Sabina, you are recognized on the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think it behooves this body to seriously think of the impacts of this bill and to, should this bill pass, which I do not support, should this bill pass, we must take every measure to protect our community from this. We already know the impacts from other jurisdictions, and we should follow the wise advice or the experience from these jurisdictions.
Senator, can we talk on the amendment
Sure.
right now, please?
So regarding the amendment, I feel that it does not reflect the level in which we need to mitigate this bill.
So thank you.
Yeah, I would, I would basically I wait to see the amendments from the senator from Jotnya.
Thank you. Anyone else on the amendment? Anyone else? Senator Terlahi, are you ready? It's for Senator Moylan's amendment. Vice Speaker Nelson, you are recognized.
Susan Smasi, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I understand that perhaps we're putting the carts before the horse by taking these taxes and implementing it already in pre-positioned areas in our government. But it would be wise of us to be very prudent in this measure, because I have witnessed many times where we've overlooked something and say that we can postpone it at a later date because of an additional measure, that we can add this in at that time. And by the time that time comes, there's nothing really that is held to the things that we've said in the past. And so while we're on this measure, and I understand myself, this is a lot to digest, and we're working very hard to ensure that the areas in the community that scientific study shows that are impacted by recreationalizing marijuana, that we are focusing on these specific sectors in our government agency. I'm speaking on the amendment. And so the one thing that I have with this amendment is the Guam Customs and Quarantine Agency, and perhaps they might get a little bit upset because I was their oversight chair. But they have the adjudication, the AAA authority to raise their own passenger fees, which directly funds the Guam Customs and Quarantine. So we should not be making them a priority. We should be making the services that will impact our community a priority. And those are transitional housing for those suffering from addiction. We have testimony asking us to reconsider this bill, because the recovering addicts are asking us not to do it because they know that they are at a vulnerable state. And so there's other areas in our government that we can help to help our community address the homeless issue. And many of our homeless, a lot of them are impacted by drugs. Address programs that help create better parks for our children so they are not succumb to being vulnerable, or they have idle hands where if someone tries to peddle a joint to them, that they'll smoke the joint rather than go play basketball on the court. By the way, we're very limited in our gyms and our courts that we have. Fix the pools so that we can keep our children occupied in extracurricular activities. We must invest this in the people, in the community. Guam Customs and Quarantine, they can raise their passenger fee. I've been working with them since last term to do it. So I feel that, rightfully so, we should focus on these areas. Behavioral health, public health, Guam Housing Corporation for transitional homes for our recovering addicts so that they can rebuild their lives. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Anyone else wishing to speak on the amendment? Senator Terlahi, you are recognized on your amendment. The copy was passed out. Clerk? Sergeant of Arms, can we get copies of that amendment, please, so that we can proceed? Senator Therese Terlahi's amendment is being photocopied right now. Sergeant of Arms, can we make sure that the copies are given to the members of the body? Senator Therese, you may speak on your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So the amendment is the part that's double underlined, and it changes 25% of the excise tax collected to 50% of the excise tax collected. And it's also on item 6, which adds a 25% of the fund to the Department of Public Health and Social Services.
On that amendment, anyone wishing to speak? Are there any? Yes, Senator Clinton, you are recognized.
I object to the amendment, Madam Speaker.
There has been an objection. All those, anyone else on the amendment? Senator Pito, you are recognized on the Terlahi amendment, to the amendment.
It's not an amendment, Madam Speaker. It's a point of information on the one that I just made to include the recruitment for conservation officers and for the equipment is not showing on this document.
On the motion to have, Senator Pito, on the motion to have legal make that correction as noted and previously passed, I will accept that motion in order. So
Thank you,
just
Madam
move
Speaker.
to have legal make the technicality based on that and making sure that that item matches with item I. Can, Senator, I will work. Senator Pito Terlahi, can you please help me make the motion to motion that to have legal,
Madam Speaker, I move to have this,
no, on that, just to
to
ask,
have legal include my previous amendment for the recruitment, to be amended for the recruitment and for the availability of resources, equipment.
on that motion by Senator Pito Terlahi. No objection, motion carries. Senator Terlahi, anyone else wishing to speak on that amendment? Senator Torres, you are recognized on Senator Therese Terlahi's amendment.
Madam Speaker, I just want to point out that in my quick review of the items 1 to 6, the percentages exceed 100%, and I just
Yes,
wanted to
I
clarify.
understand that, and they're getting a clarification from legal. I brought that question up to check to see, because the percentages weren't right. I will ask legal. Yeah, I understand. I asked legal. Senator Torres, would you like to move to ask for the recess?
Madam Chair, I just want, I mean, it can be very easily amended by the mover of item 6. If we're going to add 25%, how do we then adjust it? It can be very simple.
I understand, Senator Torres, and I'm working with Senator Therese Terlahi, right?
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, there is an objection on the floor. Is anyone else wishing to speak on the Therese Terlahi amendment? There has been an objection by Senator Clint Rigel already. Anyone else wishing to speak on the amendment? If not, I will call for the vote or give the opportunity for the author of the amendment to close. I need you to speak. Senator Perez, would you like to speak on the amendment to the amendment? You are recognized.
Yes, so Madam Speaker, I move to recess until this is fixed, the language is fixed, because it's over 100%.
There's a motion to recess. Are there any objections? There's an objection. All those in favor to recess, please signify by raising your hand. Motion fails. Senator Clint Rigel on the amendment, to the amendment.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify my reason for the objection to the amendment, and my reason is because we're now eating into the excise taxes again. There was a lot of discussion where colleagues, we all discussed this and said 25% would be a fair amount, and now it's being moved up to 50%, which I think we're beginning to eat in too much into the excise taxes without even knowing what the excise taxes are going to be. And so, yes, there is an estimate that the excise taxes are over $5 million, but that's a low estimate. That's an estimate based on a 2003 U.S. Department of Justice estimate of cannabis users on Guam, and then they extrapolated that information and came up with an estimate of their own of how much revenue that would produce. So I think the revenues are going to be higher than that, so if we're going to keep eating into it, we're going to end up appropriating everything before we've even collected anything. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
There was an objection. Senator Therese, you can close on your...
Madam Speaker, we are fixing the amendment because the previous speaker was correct. There's an error in it, and I would ask the courtesy of being allowed to fix this amendment to an amendment that we just received. And legal is working very hard, and they just need a few more minutes. It's not going to take long, and we have taken recesses for every single other person in this body, and I can't see why
So
I
make
can't
the
be
motion
extended
to-
that courtesy.
Yes, Senator, please make the motion to recess. Motion to
I'm
recess.
asking you to just recess us for 3 minutes, Madam Speaker.
No objections? Motion carries. We will recess for 3 minutes. legislature's back from recess. Senator Therese Terlawi on your amendment, to the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my colleagues for their patience. So the amendment's been passed out, and again, to reiterate, it's an amendment to the amendment, and instead of taking 25% of the excise taxes collected, it will now take 50% of the excise taxes collected and appropriate them as listed below. So the list that we've already discussed is still there. The 25% goes towards that list, so there's no change. But an additional 25% will go to the Department of Public Health, and that's indicated on item 1, the double underline. And I wanted to just also point out that, you know, of course, I'm trying to look at other states and see how they do it. And I was convinced by the states that I looked at that the key to their success was their realizing that, you know, of course, the Department of Revenue and Taxation, who's going to do the licensing, come up with the rules and regs, that they had to work in conjunction with public health and human services. And so, just for an example, in Colorado, there's their marijuana tax cash fund. The way they allocate that there is public health gets 20 million, human services 37 million. In comparison to what they give public safety from that fund is 1.5 million, and agriculture 2.2 million. And that's just from this one fund. And so there are other funds there in that state also. And of course, on top of everything, and on Guam, we're going to have GRTs, and we're going to be able to allocate those appropriately to the agencies. And so I just think that if the success of the programs rely on these agencies, then the success of our program should also, you know, reflect that we are willing to dedicate resources to those agencies. Right now, I forgot to mention this, is that, so on the recent briefing by Public Health here on Guam regarding the Medicinal Cannabis Law, this was just maybe 8 days ago, they had a briefing, and they promised at that briefing, they showed all the progress or lack of progress, and what the issues they thought were, and they promised to do their part, which we know has kind of been lacking from the Department of Public Health for the medicinal cannabis program. But they estimated for the medicinal cannabis program that they need an immediate appropriation of $800,000 to move forward. And so at the time, of course, everybody in the room was, okay, whatever you need, that's what we got to give you because we really need that program. But from the estimates on from this bill, again, on the $5 million, that's all I can use because that's all I have in this committee report is the $5 million estimate by BBMR. This would really just be still only giving about $1 million to public health. So hopefully, I mean, and again, I understand it's excise tax, which is not even going to be collected until after the program is stood up, but I'm just hoping that showing these kinds of priorities for the allocation is going to serve us in establishing the program. Knowing public health can put in an investment, knowing it's going to be a priority of the legislature that it get funded. Situs Masi, Madam Speaker, and to my colleagues.
Thank you, Senator Terlahi. On the amendment to the amendment, Senator Rigel, there was an objection.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I'd like to withdraw my objection.
On that motion to withdraw the objection, no. Senator San Agustin, you're recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise in support of this amendment.
Thank you.
It's a good protection for the people.
Thank you, Senator San Agustin. On Senator Rigel's motion to withdraw his objection, no objection, motion carries. On the Moylan main amendment, with the amendments intact, no, I'm sorry. On the Senator Therese Terlahi amendment, are there any objections? No objection. Motion carries. On the main Senator Moylan amendment, are there anyone else wishing to speak? If not, Senator Moylan, would you like to vote or would you like to close on that main amendment?
Madam Speaker, I'd like to move for the vote, please.
On that motion, are there any objections? No objections, motion carries. Next on the agenda, ladies and gentlemen, we have Senator Amanda Shelton. You are recognized. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to note before Senator Shelton speaks, we have seven more speakers on this bill. Looking at the time we have before us, we will take extended time this evening. I can't. I do apologize. Next on the agenda to speak is Senator Luis Muñoz on the main bill.
Madam Speaker, I would like to pass on this one again because now the most recent amendment is some of the questions that I had, so I just kind of want to retrain my thoughts again to what's happening. So if we could just go on to the next person, I'll wait.
Senator Talina Nelson on the main. Senator Tello Taitagui on the main motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have an amendment here that has been passed out to all my colleagues. They should have it. This is, and if I can, Madam Speaker, I'd like to explain the amendment, if I could. Okay, this amendment is Section 70.53, Intoxication of Persons Under the Age of 21. And this is under, if anybody wants to read it, Title 9 of GCA. This is a new section added to this bill.
Senator Tello Taitagui, if I may, just so that we're clear with our with our colleagues, are you wanting to add a new section, or are you wanting to? Can you reference the page and the line that you are working off of? Just for clarification.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for that question. And I've worked with legal, and legal will place in an area that he sees fit.
To add a new section.
Yeah, to add a new section.
Thank you very much, Senator
And I
Taitagui.
believe most likely it will be probably on the last page, okay?
Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Madam Speaker, what this amendment does is strengthen, or should I say, it follows the same guidelines in dealing with individuals 21 and below, or 21 below, with regards to alcoholic beverages. And if I may, Madam Speaker, I'd like to read this.
Please proceed.
Okay. Section 70-33, Intoxication of Persons Under the Age of 21. A, no person 21 years or older shall knowingly give or otherwise make available any alcoholic beverage / cannabis to a person under the age of 21 years old. A person violates this section who gives or otherwise makes available alcoholic beverage / cannabis to a person under the age of 21 with the knowledge that the person to whom the alcoholic beverage / cannabis is made available will violate this Chapter 70.53. B, A person violates this section who owns, occupies, or controls premises on which alcoholic beverages / cannabis are consumed by any person under 21 years of age and who knows of alcohol / cannabis consumption by persons under 21 years of age on such premises and who reasonably can be prohibited or prevent such alcohol / cannabis consumption. Section C. Any person who violates this section, 1, shall be punished by a fine of not more than $2,000 or by imprisonment for not more than 1 year or both. 2, in addition to the sentence referenced in 1, the court may require the violator to make restitution for any damages to property or persons caused by a violation of this section 70.53 and may require participation in volunteer service to community service agencies. D, the prohibition of this section shall apply only to a person who is present and in control of the location at the time the consumption occurs. The prohibition of this section do not apply to the owner of rental property or the agent of an owner of rental property unless the consumption occurs in the individual unit in which the owner or agent resides. E, this section shall not apply to any religious practice, observance, or ceremony. F, the violation of this section and the resulting penalties subscribed herein supra are in addition to other violations of public law related to alcohol beverages / cannabis. Madam Speaker, it was brought to my attention that in the event this bill should pass, we need some stiffer laws for those individuals who have this cannabis in hand. So I believe, Madam Speaker, this amendment would address that because it's the same laws that govern over alcoholic beverage consumptions of minors or individuals below the age of 21. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Tadagui. And again, to note for the record that this section will be added to the end, but also to note that it would be to the statute as it exists today. Senator San Augustine, you are recognized on the motion, on the amendment, and then Senator Teresa Terlahi, you're number 2. Senator Joe San Augustine.
Madam Speaker, maybe the author can yield to the question. I'm only concerned is that I don't predict we're going to be selling cannabis at the same place we're selling alcohol. Alcohol beverage has a different citation in the Guam Code. I would actually be asked that maybe we amend and just take out the word alcohol beverage because we're talking about cannabis. I understand the reasons why we want to impose this restriction and the fines, but I honestly believe that the word alcohol beverage in every part of this amendment be struck, and then we stick with what the bill is. It's about cannabis. And then we can discuss another bill on alcohol beverage to increase their fines. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Would you like to yield, Senator Terlahi, to the question?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To my colleague from Chico, right? Chico? Okay. Chico. Okay, I think the question proffered was, should we have alcohol in here? If you notice that I'm just basically cutting and pasting, taking the law from the intoxication persons underage, which is cited in Title 9 of GCA, and incorporating it into this bill. And doing so, I'm not taking anything out. So if we were to take it out I don't think it would matter at this point. But still speak about alcohol. We're incorporating cannabis to this section.
Thank you, Senator Terlaye. Senator San Augustine?
Maybe, Madam Speaker, then my amendment to her amendment is to strike wherever you find alcohol beverage on this amendment, and that it says, like on, it would be line 2, give or otherwise make available any cannabis to a person. Not strike everywhere you find alcohol beverage and leave the word cannabis there.
Does everybody understand that amendment? There is an amendment to the amendment to delete alcoholic beverages on all the sections on this. Anyone wishing to speak to the amendment? Yes. Hold on. I have her and then you. Do you have a point of information? Ask her if she has a point of information. Senator San Augustine. Senator San Augustine, you still have the floor.
Madam Speaker, I withdraw my amendment. I spoke with legal. I have no problem. Thank you.
Thank you. On the main amendment by Senator Taitigui, I do have Senator Torres and Senator Terlai.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before that recess, what I was attempting to do was rise in support of this amendment, because what this amendment is doing is essentially, it's just amending Article 3 of Title 9, which is the Guam Social Host Act. And all this amendment does is it attaches cannabis where alcohol beverage now exists. So I don't think that there's any harm in this, and I think that there's actually good in it, so I would support this. And again, the placement of this would most logically go to page 29 at about line 3. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're very welcome, Senator Torres. Senator Therese Terlai on the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I also rise in support of this amendment. I think it's a very good one. The bill that we're looking at has a slight gap that when it decriminalizes and removes from the criminal code all references to marijuana, it really doesn't. And while we wait for the rules and regulations to be implemented or even written by the Department of Revenue and Taxation and the board, it really gives no authority to enforce selling to a minor or anything. And so I think that this is important because it does protect minors and puts a little bit more of a duty of those people who might have cannabis in the house to make sure that it doesn't get into the hands of minors as is intended by this law. So I appreciate the amendment. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Si Diyos Masi, Senator Therese Terlai. Senator Luis Muña on the Taitigui amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I also, too, rise in support of this amendment, and I think this could also address some of the concerns that some of our colleagues have about it getting into the hands of the minors, and puts the responsibility into the person who is handling it and making sure that they make sure that they don't get it in the hands of our minors. So I also rise in support of this amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Si Diyos Masi, Senator Muña. Anyone else on the Senator Taitigui amendment? Do you have a point of information, Senator?
Yes, just if I could just ask legal to make sure and maybe make a motion that they are authorized to amend this as necessary. The words on Part A don't seem to make sense, where after the underlined cannabis is made available. So if they could just make sure that we're not changing that language in the statute, they could just make sure that that's all. And yeah, that's all. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. On that amendment, without an objection, motion carries. On the Taitigui amendment and Senator Clint Rigel amendment, are there anyone else wishing to speak? If not, Senator Taitigui, would you like to close? On the motion, are there any objections? No. Is there an objection? No objection. Motion carries. I apologize, folks. It's really hard to hear. So if you can just, thank you. Again, Senator Taitigui, you still have the floor. You have a couple of minutes. If not, Senator Mary Torres on the main motion.
Madam Speaker, I move to add an amendment to line 17, page 23, to add a new subsection P under section 9107 of the bill, and to renumber the current P as Q.
Is that amendment? Do we have that amendment, Senator Torres? I apologize. I don't see it in front of me.
I apologize if they weren't circulated, Madam Speaker. I'll reconfirm. I assume they were.
Do you have a copy, clerk?
Madam Chair, you can move on if for expediency's sake, and I'll have copies made. Slide 28.
Thank you, Senator Mary Torres. Senator Therese Terlahi, on the main bill, on the main motion. Would you care to speak on? You raised your hand a couple of days ago. You're here. Okay. If not, we are back up to Senator Amanda Shelton. Sergeant of Arms, is Senator Mary Torres's amendment bill? So while the copies are being distributed, I will note to speak on the main motion. I still have Senator Shelton, Senator Talina Nelson, Senator Luis Muñoz, and Senator Lee. Sergeant of Arms, were all the copies disseminated? Senator Mary Torres, on your amendment.
Sidus Mossy, Madam Chair. Again, I propose an amendment to line 17 of page 23. This is regarding the duties of the Cannabis Control Board. I move to add a new subsection P under section 9107 of the bill and to renumber the current P as Q. And if I may read the amendment.
Please do.
The new subsection P is to read P, developing an annual report which shall include but not be limited to A, incidents of impaired driving, hospitalization, and use of other health care services related to cannabis use on Guam. B, ownership and employment trends in Guam's cannabis industry, examining participation by racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic subgroups, including identification of barriers to participation in the industry. C, a compilation of data on the number of incidents of discipline in schools, including suspensions or expulsions resulting from cannabis use or possession of cannabis or cannabis products. And D, a compilation of data on the number of penalties, arrests, prosecutions, incarcerations, and/or sanctions imposed for violations under this Act. The Board shall incorporate available data into its report and coordinate with the Department of Public Health and Social Services, the Guam Department of Education, the Guam Police Department, the Guam Department of Labor, and the Guam Economic Development Authority. The Board shall annually submit its report to the Speaker of the Legislature in Guahan, and when appropriate, make recommendations for further research or policy changes. The annual report shall be posted online on the Legislature in Guahan's website. The intent of this amendment, Madam Speaker, is to provide for sufficient reporting data of the effects and barriers and obstacles and all things that need to be considered, the effects of the cannabis industry on our community and our children, so that we might have data from which to formulate additional policies or areas of particular interest that we can address. Sizus Maasi.
Buen provecho, Senator Mary Torres. On the Torres amendment, Senator Regine Biscoli, you're recognized.
Sidus Maasi, Madam Speaker, I rise in support of this amendment and I thank the author. I think it's incredibly important that we as a body are considering evidence-based models, evidence-based policy. We need to move forward not just with evidence-based policy, but with data that is locally gathered and will provide us with a good foundation to make additional measures, either through the legislature in Guahan, but also the Cannabis Board, so they can be able to determine not just negative impacts, these potential crimes, but also take a look at the cannabis industry and how it might be growing, who might be affected, who might be benefiting, and how we might be able to further incentivize some of our small businesses to continue to thrive based on this measure and based on this amendment. So I stand in support of this amendment and I ask my colleagues to do the same. Sidus Maasi.
Buen provecho, Senator Lee. Anyone else on the amendment? Anyone else wishing to speak? If not, Senator Terlai, you are recognized. We're supposed to be looking.
Yes, I want to thank the author of this amendment. It's an excellent amendment, and it requires the reporting going forward. I'm also planning to make an amendment, and hopefully that's going to require this baseline data that be assessed prior to implementation so that they have something to compare it to as they go along. But to spare us all the time, I'll do that separately. I think it can hang by itself. So I want to commend the author of this amendment. It's an excellent amendment, and I agree that we do need to rely on the data going forward.
Buen provecho, Senator Terlahi. Anyone else on the amendment? If not, Senator Torres, you may close the rest. On the Senator Torres amendment, are there any objections? Seeing no objections, motion carries. Senator Amanda, it's back up to you again.
Such Masi, Madam Speaker. I have a question for the author, if the author of this bill will yield.
Please state your question.
Well, the enforcement of federal drug laws fall with the U.S. Department of Justice. I'd like to know if the author has sought an answer from the Department of Justice or the U.S. Attorney about how and if the federal government will enforce existing federal law. I am very concerned that if this legislation is to pass and hundreds of thousands of dollars is invested into this industry, and it would only be shut down if the Department of Justice were to choose to enforce that law here on the island. So if the author would yield, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. Senator Rigel, would you like to yield?
Yes, Madam Speaker, I'll yield to the question. So the short answer is no, I have not asked that question of the U.S. Department of Justice. However, it should be noted that the U.S. Department of Justice has been defunded from going after states that have legalized cannabis. So in the Budget Act that was passed, they defunded the Department of Justice and basically made it so that they are not allowed to expend funds on enforcement of cannabis in states that have legalized cannabis.
Senator Shelton, does that answer your inquiry? You may proceed.
Such Masi, Madam Speaker, I'd also like to offer an amendment. The amendment, I believe, has been passed out to our colleagues. The amendment is to add a new section 8118 after section 8117 on page 19. This is similar to an amendment that we saw yesterday. Oh, I'm sorry, it has not been passed out, so I'll ask that copies be passed out.
Senator Amanda, you may speak on your amendment. Thank you.
Such Masi, Madam Speaker, I believe the amendment has been passed out, and as I said, this is similar to an amendment proposed yesterday, but it addresses some of the concerns that my colleagues had with the original amendment, and so it reads a new section 8118, unlawful dissemination of cannabis odor. No person or business shall permit or cause the smoke or noxious odor from cannabis cultivation or consumption to emanate from its point of generation onto another real property that is not in its possession. Violations in this section shall be deemed a nuisance in accordance with Part 3 of Chapter 10 of Title 20 and Section 23101 of Chapter 23 of Title 21 Guam Code Annotated. Violations of this section and the resulting penalties herein are in addition to other violations and penalties of public law. So I believe my colleagues had an issue with including the word smell of cannabis in the original amendment. So this amendment would not include the word smell because we wouldn't be able to tell, but for smoke and noxious odor. And this is the purpose of this amendment is to add another layer of protection for our community, especially those with respiratory issues who do not wish to be exposed to secondhand smoke. So, Sitius Masi, Madam Speaker.
Buen provecho, Senator Shelton. On the Senator Shelton amendment, Senator Mary Torres, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate that this amendment was brought up again because I believe that the first time around, many of us in the body were a little confused about what constitutes a nuisance and how an odor relates to a nuisance that would be something that can be offensive in accordance to Chapter 10 of Title 20. And I wanted to, for the benefit of our body and anyone who may be listening and wondering why there should be attention to the unlawful dissemination of cannabis odor, I want to read from the section, Chapter 10 of Title 20, Section 10101, where it defines what is nuisance. And if I may read, what is nuisance? Anything which is injurious to health or is indecent or offensive to the senses, or an obstruction to the free use of property so as to interfere with the comfortable enjoyment of life or property, or unlawfully obstructs the free passage or use in the customary manner of any river, bay, stream, canal, basin, any public park, square, street, or highway, is a nuisance. So in this case, it does seem fitting. At first we were a little concerned about to what degree an odor can be a nuisance, but I believe that within Chapter 10, Title 20, nuisance is very clearly defined as to the odor which will interfere with the comfortable enjoyment of life or property, or which would obstruct the free passage in the area. So I rise in support of this amendment, and I think that at first we thought that it was trivial, but it actually is not trivial, and it is an appropriate component of this bill. So I rise in support.
Senator Torres. Anyone else on the Shelton amendment? If not, anyone else wishing to speak? If not, Senator Shelton, would you like to close?
Sitius Masi, Madam Speaker, and I'd also like to draw my colleagues' attention that in this amendment it has also included Chapter 23 of Title 21 that also defines a nuisance as an action may be brought by any person whose property is injuriously affected or whose personal enjoyment is lessened by a nuisance. So that's in another part of our Guam Code that is also included in this amendment. And I'd like to thank my colleagues in advance for supporting this amendment.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. On the amendment, are there any objections? No objections. Motion carries. Senator Shelton, you still have the floor. You have several minutes left.
Sitius Masi, Madam Speaker, and I rise with some concerns for this bill and for some of the unforeseen impacts of this legislation if it were to pass. Of course, I am in complete support of medicinal cannabis for those who are in absolute need of the medicine. But I think that we do not need to open our community to the potential of another harm by opening access to our youth and vulnerable populations, because with greater availability, we will see an increase of supply and drive and demand. And so at this time, especially for young people, when brains are developing, a growing list of research shows us that the adolescent and young adult brain is adversely affected by marijuana. Studies show that regular marijuana use changes the structure of the teenage brain, especially in areas dealing with memory and problem solving, leading to permanent structural changes. A study from Duke University entitled Persistent Cannabis Users Show Neuropsychological Decline from Childhood to Midlife, published in the Journal of Psychological and Cognitive Sciences, found that on average, adolescent onset users of cannabis lost 8 points in IQ in adulthood, and that even ceasing marijuana use in adulthood for the adolescent onset users did not fully restore neuropsychological functions. A recent study published by the Lancet Psychiatry just last week found an alarming link between cannabis use and the onset of psychotic disorder. Daily cannabis use was associated with increased odds of psychotic disorder compared with never users, increasing the nearly 5 times increased odds of daily users of high-potency cannabis. I'd be glad to provide any of these studies to my colleagues as well. High-potency cannabis is defined as greater than 10% THC content. During a tour of DYA recently, I spoke with Director Melanie Brennan, who expressed concerns about the legalization of recreational marijuana, saying that a large percentage of the population of DYA were marijuana users. As the above studies show, marijuana has a permanent detrimental effect on the teenage brain. Madam Speaker, possession of marijuana is already decriminalized, with possession of under an ounce only receiving a citation, a ticket. Greater availability and mass production would undoubtedly increase supply and drive demand. While some contend it will not lead to increased teen use, recent studies refute that. In an article, Association of State Recreational Marijuana Laws with Adolescent Marijuana Use found that there were increased marijuana use among adolescents in states in which marijuana was legalized. In states in which marijuana was not legalized, marijuana use among adolescents decreased, while in Washington state, adolescent use more than doubled in the period after legalization. The Attorney General has expressed reservations about this bill. The Attorney General says that he has concerns about public safety if this bill were to be passed. With this concern, it is imperative that we get relevant testimony from public safety stakeholders about how to plan and handle this new industry. There's no testimony from GPD and there's no testimony specifically from DYA, both of which would be crucial input for the proper implementation of this bill. I support medicinal use of cannabis, again, so that our patients can get the care that they absolutely need and deserve. The government's failure to properly implement medicinal cannabis and all the subsequent legislation to amend the statute on medicinal cannabis should give us pause to make sure we get this right. We should not rush to pass something just to pass something. We should have proper input and implementation if we are sincere about doing this right. Madam Speaker, additionally, GVB has also expressed concern about this legislation. Attitudes about cannabis are not as liberal in South Korea or in Japan as they are in Colorado or California, and many families still see it as unsafe. Guam is marketed as a family-friendly destination, and GVB visitor exit polls have shown time and again that the #1 concern of our tourists coming to Guam is their safety and their family's safety. There has been no study done by GVB to determine potential attitudes to cannabis, legalization by our tourists, and that question is too important to our overall economy to leave to chance. Tourism from these Asian markets are the #1 industry on Guam. How can we, with all prudence, say that we honestly know how it would affect the tourism industry? I know some may say tourism in Colorado and Washington state increased, but attitudes in Asian countries from our Asian tourists are much different. There may also be concerns about importation in their jurisdictions, and they may move to screen or further restrict visitation to our island. Lastly, Madam Speaker, marijuana, again, as I said, is already decriminalized on Guam for possession under an ounce, so we already are not going after most for leisure use. Perhaps this is the best of both worlds. We cannot invite the importation of cannabis or its proliferation. Some proponents may claim that the proliferation of marijuana cultivation on Guam is a good thing, one which would grow a new industry. However, the growth of supply can lead to a growth of demand, and in a closed island system like ours, the growth isn't exported to other states. That growth instead occurs within our people, making it more available to children and adolescents. So I can't stand here and say that the fear of missing the boat of opening up a new industry should be what drives us to rush this decision to legalize recreational cannabis for our community. Seduas Masi, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. Senator Talina Nelson on the main motion.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to wait until we finish with all the amendments. I believe there's still some more amendments waiting.
Senator Nelson, it is up on the list. Anyone else wishing to speak before I call Senator Luis Muña? You are recognized on the motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Rest assured, I don't have any amendments, but I do have some questions for the author, just for clarification, if I may.
Please state your question.
So before I ask the questions for the author, I just want to commend the author, first of all, for standing by what he promised the people that he would do. And although there's so much controversy surrounding this measure right now, he's still standing firm, and I just want to show my appreciation for him doing that, for standing by it. Second, I just want to say that there's really no question about my advocacy for the patients, and I just want everyone to know that how I feel about cannabis for therapy and for relief, and really that's where I stand firm on. I'm opening up my minds to everything and all the discussion that's going on with our colleagues here, and I really do appreciate the engagement, because really what it's doing is it's educating us on this particular drug, cannabis, and what it does for the people. And when I do feel that there's no easy way to decide this measure, I feel like we need to take our time and not rush through this process, because it is going to affect so many different lives, and in a good way, or in some cases also in a bad way. And that's what this bill is doing. This bill is actually strengthening or creating laws to make sure that it doesn't get in the hands of our people, our children. That's what this bill is doing. Because right now, it's illegal and it's happening everywhere. We just got to open up our eyes and make our laws stronger so that it doesn't get in the hands of our kids. And if that's really what our concern is, then that's what this bill is doing. Because right now, there are no laws. I mean, it's just completely illegal, but everybody's just doing it anyway. So let's just strengthen the laws with this bill. That's the way I feel. I also think that at this point, I've actually been listening to a lot of the testimony that's been coming in. People have been messaging me. They've been telling me where they stand on it, and not even asking them why, because it really doesn't matter to me. I know some people have some personal experience that will, no matter what we do to make this a good bill, they're still not going to vote for it. And I know there are some people that will still support it for whatever reason. But throughout this past weekend, I've been realizing that it's pretty balanced. There are people who are voting for it, or who are all for it, and then there are people who aren't. So we have that tough decision to make right here, because this is what we ran for. We ran to represent the people. But what really lies in your heart? What really lies in your heart? Are you willing to open up your mind and let's fix the laws and make this work? Or are you just willing to stand firm and believe what you believe? That's it. So my question for the author, if we can just clarify, on the excess excise tax, if he can so yield to a few of my questions, where did the tax estimates come from? I wanted to know, like, where did the 15% tax estimate come from?
Senator Clint, would you like to yield to Senator Muñoz?
Yes, Madam Chair. So the 15% excise tax was, we looked at different jurisdictions, and different jurisdictions had different levels of tax, and 15% was one of the jurisdictions that had that level of tax. I don't remember exactly which ones. Some were higher, some were lower, and I believe 15% was sort of like a middle ground sort of tax.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Also, and I'm sure he's worked with Revenue and Tax. I would like to find out, too, how GovGuam will monitor and regulate this industry if they're unable to open up accounts. Has the author communicated with GovGuam and how they're actually going to be able to regulate this industry? That was my question.
Senator Rigel, would you like her to repeat the question? I know you...
No, I can yield to the question.
Please proceed.
So yes, what's going to have to be done is there's going to have to be a seed-to-sale tracking system implemented, similar to the system that was supposed to be implemented for the medicinal cannabis law. So the seed-to-sale tracking system is something that the government will have to procure in order to track everything from the seed to the sale. And there's numerous different types of companies that provide this service, so it'll be up to the government of Guam to go through the procurement process and procure the right vendor for this job.
Senator Muñoz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And finally, the author mentioned that we should get in front of this, when he first introduced the bill, that we should get in front of this if or when the U.S. makes adult use cannabis legal. I just have a question for the author that what do you think will happen to our local industry if they make it legal? What will happen to our local industry here when maybe an opportunity for them to get it cheaper importing it?
Senator Rigel, would you like to yield?
Absolutely, yes, I'd like to yield to that question. So that is precisely the reason I think it should be legalized here first, is because then we can actually build an industry, create one here on island so that will become the base market, and then imports will become the niche market. If we allow it to go legal at the federal level first, then the imports will become the base market, and there might not be much room for a niche local market.
Senator Muñoz.
Thank you. I just wanted some clarification on some of those points that I was looking through the bill. I do know, Madam Speaker, before I give up my spot here, that I just want to close with the fact that I am in support of our patients, and if this is an opportunity for us to get the medicine into the hands of our patients a lot sooner, then I'm willing to support it. I do appreciate all of the engagement with my colleagues, though, and I thank them for educating the public, too, as well, when it comes to cannabis. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're very welcome, Senator Muñoz. On the main motion, anyone else wishing to speak? If not, I will invite Senator Tello. You did speak on the main motion already? Yes, you did. Anyone else wishing to speak on the main motion? Senator Nelson and Senator? If not, I will call Senator Clinton Rigel to close. Senator Nelson, you are recognized.
Yes, just a point of order, Madam Speaker.
Yes, ma'am, you got a point of order.
Thank you. Are we going to introduce amendments during the closing, or are we all going to speak on the motion and then we're going to close?
Senator Nelson, the author of the legislation has the right to close and make amendments on his own.
Okay.
I want you to know that we have had 10 of our colleagues speak on the main measure already. This is the opportunity for my colleagues to speak. If not, would you like to speak? I've called you a couple of times. You may be recognized. You are recognized by speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was just asking that just for clarification.
No
I
worries.
appreciate it. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Madam Speaker, I want to thank my colleagues for all of their input and the effort that they have put forward into the amendments on this bill and trying to ensure that it does not impact our community in a negative way. Madam Speaker, when this bill was introduced, we went and we looked into some research. And I really tried to focus the research to be scientific studies and not propaganda against marijuana or propaganda for marijuana, just to see the facts behind the studies that the states have already made recreational marijuana legal. And it is true that there are 10 states that have legalized marijuana, and the District of Columbia. And in all these states that is afforded the law, all these states passed marijuana legalization through referendum, except one, and that was the state of Vermont. And the reason why the state of Vermont did not do a referenda for legalizing marijuana is because they don't have a referenda law for the electorate to vote. And so this is why that state pushed it through a legislation bill. In the Journal of Family Practice, there was a study on potential adverse consequences of cannabis use, and many of the studies showed that this is the potential adverse consequences of cannabis use. Although the potential adverse consequences are vast, this is potential, okay? The literature on this subject is limited for various reasons. Many studies are observational with a small sample size. Most studies examine smoked cannabis, not other routes of delivery. When smoked, the dose frequency, duration, and smoking technique are variable, meaning they've been either ingested or smoked. The quantity of THC, the primary psychoactive component in cannabis, is variable. Most studies do not examine medical users who are expected to use less cannabis over lower doses of THC. There are confounding effects of other drugs, notably tobacco, which is used by up to 90% of cannabis users. Lower quality of life. In general, regular non-medical cannabis use is associated with a lower quality of life and poor socioeconomic outcomes. Physical and mental health is ranked by lower heavy users as compared to extremely low users. Some who attempt butane extraction of THC from the plant have experienced explosions and severe burns. Use linked to car accidents. More recent work indicates cannabis use is associated with injuries in motor vehicle, non-traffic, and workplace settings. In fact, a meta-analysis found a near doubling of motor vehicle accidents with recent use. Psychomotor impairment persists for at least 6 hours after smoking cannabis, at least 10 hours after ingesting it, because it takes time to go within our system if we are ingesting it. Importantly, individuals using marijuana may not recognize the presence or extent of the impairment they are experiencing, placing themselves and others in dangers. Data are insufficient to ascribe marijuana an increase in overall mortality, and there have been no reported overdose deaths from respiratory depression. So essentially, Madam Speaker, there's a lot of gaps in this study. There's, in this Journal of Family Practice, they're trying to study the impact of THC, of marijuana, of cannabis, and they're even identifying that there's a lot of gaps. However, a few deaths and a greater number of hospitalizations due mainly to central nervous system effects, including agitation, depression, coma, delirium, and toxic psychosis, have been attributed to the use of synthetic cannabinoids. Cannabis use can pose a risk to the fetus. About 5% of pregnant women report recent marijuana use for recreational reasons, and there is concern about its effects on the developing fetus. Certain rare pediatric cancers and birth defects have been reported with cannabis use. Mood benefit research suggests otherwise. The psychiatric effects of cannabis are not fully understood. Again, it's not fully understood. Users may claim mood benefit, but research suggests marijuana prompts the development or worsening of anxiety, depression, and suicidality. Violence, paranoia, and borderline personality features have also been associated with use. Cannabis use disorder. About 9% of those who try cannabis develop cannabis use disorder, which is characterized by continuing use of the substance despite significant distress or impairment. Cannabis use disorder is essentially an addiction. Primary risk factors include male gender, younger age at marijuana initiation, and personal or family history of other substance or psychiatric problems. So this is just a quick excerpt, and there's like 60 sightings of this scientific study. Then the Brown University Child and Adolescent Psychopharmacology Update. DEA keeps marijuana illegal but encourages more research into medical use. So again, we see a lack in the research that has been done in cannabis, in the use of cannabis. The research found that average marijuana exposure visits and population rates at the Children's Hospital increased in the 2 years following legalization compared with the 2 years before legalization. The Regional Poison Center numbers show a jump in marijuana exposure cases from 9 in 2009 to 47 in 2015. In 2014 and 2015, there were a few more cases of children who needed to be placed on a ventilator. One death was reported involving an 11-month-old who presented unresponsive with tachycardia, but the relationship to the THC in the child's system was unclear. As marijuana becomes more available, exposures may continue to increase, increasing the hospital burden and using more health financial resources. State legislatures offered a response to this issue this year by adopting a bill that, as of July 1st, bars the sale of marijuana products in the shapes of people, animals, or fruit. So you can't sell marijuana in perhaps like in a gummy bear form, because it kind of brings in the, it's an enticement for children. Oregon, this is from the American Psychological Association. Oregon recreational marijuana legalization changes in undergraduates. Marijuana use rates from 2008 to 2016. The effects of U.S. states' recreational marijuana legalization on substance use rates are not well established. Given that marijuana use increased risk for substance use disorders and health and adjustment problems, there may be adverse public health effects if recreational marijuana legalization increases the prevalence of marijuana use and the frequency of use among users. Young people may be especially sensitive to recreational marijuana. For example, rates of marijuana use increased among 8th and 10th graders in Washington following legalizing marijuana compared to peers in non-recreational marijuana states. Surprisingly, rates did not change after recreational marijuana for Colorado youth or Washington 12th graders. Still, adolescents have shown decreased perception of harm from marijuana and increases in favorable attitudes about use after recreational marijuana, which may increase onset risk in later adolescence, early adulthood. So again, Madam Speaker, there's still hypotheses. There's no definite theory going on. These scientific studies, the timeline for recreational marijuana, they feel that they need to study a longer timeline. Greater increases were found in rates of marijuana use in the college students at recreational marijuana states, such as Oregon University, compared to 6 institutions in non-recreational marijuana states. Another study found that following Washington's recreational marijuana law, marijuana use rates increased more among students at a large public university in that state than was predicted from national trends in use rates. Focus groups of parents and teens help develop messages to prevent early marijuana use in the context of legal retail sales. This is from the Taylor and Francis group. It is possible that legalization of retail sales will lead to greater exposure to and availability of marijuana for adolescents. So now they're talking about this possibility. Again, another uncertainty in a scientific research paper. Early onset and heavy use have been shown to disrupt individuals' functioning in school, peer, and family life. Research has consistently shown that parents' behaviors, attitudes, and communication with their children about substance use predicts substance use among their teens. So even the parents are clueless, Madam Speaker. They don't even know how to speak to their children about recreational marijuana. And in this study, it goes to further state that the parents don't know how to bridge the gap, to educate their kids and saying, just because marijuana is legal, that does not mean that you can smoke it if you're under the age of 21. Specifically in this study, the pool of children that were surveyed and studied went under the belief that recreational marijuana was across board. So this is something that we need to consider also. We need to focus on a heavy education campaign for the community. We need to bring the community along in this. Marijuana legalization in Indiana. Amending the Indiana Code to protect motorists. One common issue is the effect the legalization could have on impaired driving, also referred to as a drug driving on marijuana impaired driving. It is widely accepted that there is at least a general correlation between blood THC levels and driving impairment. Some trauma centers have reported a higher incidence of positive tests for illicit drugs than for alcohol among drivers involved in vehicle crashes. In a 2009 report, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, presented the results of its very first survey on drug use and driving. The NHTSA found that 11% of daytime drivers and 14.4% of nighttime drivers tested positive for drug use. Excuse me. Marijuana was the most commonly found illicit drug, showing up in 8.6% of the drivers tested. So, Madam Speaker, again, this is also another public issue, a community issue, a public safety issue that we need to address. Madam Speaker, just with these documentations, and I am surprised that the previous speakers also shared some of their testimonies, and some of their statistics is true. If you look at Colorado, you see an impact when recreational marijuana was legalized, this idea of black market, the black market would go away. The black market did not go away. They were trying to move it into their states. Okay, so maybe we don't have states around us, but the illegal sale of marijuana still happened even in recreational states where marijuana was legal. And Madam Speaker, my point is this is not a political issue. This is not about a special interest group who we are making policy for. This is a social issue. This issue that this decision that we make is going to impact 170,000 people, give or take. This issue that we are looking at making a decision on is going to impact the infants all the way to our manamko. This is a social issue. And tomorrow there's going to be a town hall meeting. And we're looking at closing this bill before we even go and listen to a town hall meeting. I understand that there was a public hearing. And we spent many days trying to work on this bill. I understand that too, and I respect that. But we have not done enough to bring the community along. We're hearing perspectives from different groups in our community. But we're not doing anything to educate the people out there, to educate our people, the people that will be impacted. This is not a political issue. Just because medicinal marijuana was passed and a bill was made does not mean that it's okay to make this decision on our own without going out to our community, to the villages, and saying, this is something that we're looking on doing. We're not considering everyone's voice here, when everyone is going to be impacted, not just a select few, directly or indirectly. In behavioral health, they even lack the doctors and the nurses that they need to treat recovery addicts. In the Lighthouse, many of the beds are filled, so those that want to get clean, they have to wait. And if you know someone in your family that's an addict, if and when they're ready to make the choice that they want to get clean, there's no 10 minutes from now, there's no 30 minutes from now. If that is not available to them, then they're gonna fall even deeper. And I say this because specifically in one of the testimonies, that was given during the public hearing, Mr. Bill Cundiff, U.S. Air Force Veterans Association. And it reads, my name is Bill Cundiff and I'm from Agate. I am also the president of the U.S. Air Force Veterans Association. And I want to thank all of you for allowing us to express our opinion on this bill. I also respect other opinions now and other opinions later on today and this afternoon. We will have our opinion, and I'm here today to tell you about my opinion. First of all, I do not support this proposal. 25 of the U.S. Air Force Veterans Association members do not support this proposal. 40 members of the Togi group are recovering addicts. 40 members do not support this group. Almost all of them do not support this bill at all. These are recovering addicts. They're trying to straighten out their life, and they do not support this bill at all. And if we don't know, Togi is a peer support specialist group. They are recovering addicts themselves, and they are trying to help other addicts to rebuild their lives. And can you imagine the amount of courage it takes for recovering addicts to say, we don't want this specific thing to be available to us? And as a matter of fact, just today, Madam Speaker, during our recess, I know I'm running out of time, but please indulge me. As a matter of fact, today, during our recess, I bumped into a man who was a recovering addict. And he said, you know what? I like alcohol and I like to smoke weed, but I know if I do it, it's going to go real bad from there. Which means that he's going to resort to everything else. Madam Speaker, if this is not cause for pause, then I don't know what else is. Just last week, I lost a good friend who I considered a younger brother. And you know all about that because you have a lot of brothers that are not biologically related to you. And he died from a drug overdose. And what does this have to do with recreational marijuana? The exact same thing that Mr. Bill Cundiff said. The Togi group is advocating to not support this bill. They're asking us to not make it available because they know their weakness. And for them to come out in public and sign a document acknowledging that they're addicts, it takes an enormous amount of courage and strength.
Thank you.
Madam Speaker, just after I lost my friend, my brother, I was driving home one night, which was the day after, and I find one of my family members in the middle of the road. I didn't know it was my family member at that time, but I saw someone laying there. I drove up next to the body, and I was afraid to get out of my truck because I didn't know if he was dead or alive. I was calling out to him, no response. Finally, I made the call for an ambulance. For 15 minutes, I was trying to get a response from him, applying pressure where I know that can stimulate a pain response, yelling his name so I can get a response, and nothing. The only thing that I knew that he was alive was his distant pulse, an irregular pulse and shallow breaths. I don't know why we're rushing this. Scientific studies says there's not enough information to have concrete data. Recovering addicts in our community that are suffering, that have a disease, they're sick too. And we still want to push this. This is a social issue. Everyone in the community is not aware. Even the states that legalized recreational marijuana still are not certain on the impacts. Madam Speaker, every manamko that I've bumped into, our greatest generation, as we said in earliest moments, have told me, do not pass this bill. And I said before, they have a certain wisdom that we will never attain. They have experienced the war. They have experienced true suffering. They have seen their families killed and tortured. And they're very progressive people, Madam Speaker. My grandparents, my grandmothers, were not the typical Betty Crocker Stepford wife. They wanted all of us to get an education, and they were educated women themselves. And this generation, everyone that I have bumped into said, do not vote for this bill. If this is not call for pause, Madam Speaker, the recovering addicts, inconclusive scientific data, our manamko, then I don't know what else is. This is not a political issue. This is a social issue that's going to impact every single one in our community. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator and Vice Speaker Nelson. On the, I was asked by clerk to take a couple of minutes recess just so that we can reset the recording. So we will take a moment's recess so the clerk can make those accommodations.